Chief Minister and Children's Minister, thanks for the interview. We just had the presentation from Fondre QC. What's your immediate response, your reactions to recommendations?
Well, I think we've always known we're on a journey and we've only just started out on this. So the fact that there's a recognition that there has been reasonably good progress to now is very welcome, and obviously highly welcome the work that they've done, their findings and recommendations, which we're digesting. But obviously we also know, and that's what the inquiry has shown, that there's more work to do. I think that's the summary of the position. And when I was in front of the care inquiry, when they visited, I kind of said there's probably 18 months to go before we get to what I call adequate, which probably indicates the state we were starting from, which won't be much surprise to anybody in this room, I suspect. And I think it's probably about 3 years for us to get to good. That's the target. So we've got a long way to go. We've taken those first steps. Government plans putting around, that's slightly more than £20 million extra each year, and a big chunk of that's going into children's services, and that's part of our commitment to what we're trying to achieve.
I think the panel itself mentioned that they were, I think, one of, if not the only, public inquiry to come back to do a follow-up report in this way. So I've been anticipating this day for quite some time now to get their view on what progress we've made, but most importantly, where we've not made progress quickly enough or in the way we ought to have done. So as Chief Minister said, we have only just received the report, so there will be a bit of time for thinking to digest what's in there and think about how we can move forward. But I think with the recommendations that they've made, my instant reaction is that they're really helpful because they help guide us to perhaps revisit areas that we made a bit of progress on but could do with a bit more progress, or areas that we know we're not moving quick enough on, and the extra focus that this report will give to that is helpful. So it's a really important report, and I hope it's read widely.
Wasn't it overthrown a little bit by the lady who was making all sorts of allegations at the end, saying, look, the cover-up, she's obviously got a child in some kind of childcare over here with social services. She was saying, nothing's changed, everything's still being covered up. Didn't that wasn't it kind of ironic, if you like, with the care inquiry, Francis Oldham QC saying, well, it's great, we've got a children's minister, it's great, we've got a children's commissioner, we've got this. And then somebody at the very end saying, look, my child's going through this and it's exactly the same now as it was back then. What do you think that overshadowed what was said by Francis Oldham?
Yeah, I mean, you know that we can't talk about individual cases.
No, I understand that.
It's not appropriate to do that, and we can't identify people. It is the case that there are people who remain dissatisfied with their experience through this process, whether it's a child or whether it's family members that are dissatisfied. We have to always remain open-minded to hear feedback. We have to improve our internal complaints procedures, and there is some work that's going on that, so people who feel like they're not being listened to or feel like services ought to be delivered in a different way for their circumstance have a route to go through that. But we also, on top of that, need external independent ways of holding our services to account, and the work that's going on in putting a public service ombudsman together, for example, is an important way, I think, of trying to give confidence to the public that they have a route to go down when they need it, and will be part of addressing the Jersey Way, which is something that this report highlights, just as the previous one did, which will be uncomfortable reading for some people, but is fundamentally
I mean, how does the word Jersey Way, as you know, this is my sort of area, the Jersey Way, and, you know, how is it addressed? Because it wasn't in the terms of reference of the care inquiry, was it? Now, the Attorney General wears so many different hats, and a lot of the Jersey Way is pointed towards the Attorney General's door, if you like. Because now, as it came out in the care inquiry, this presentation today, his automatic reaction was for secrecy when the children's minister, the children's commissioner, he said any legal advice that he's given, he wants to remain secret. Now how does, Chief Minister, I think would be one for you, is how does that make Jersey look, is what I'm saying, is if 2 years after the care inquiry's report about the Jersey Way, and the Attorney General is still acting on the side of secrecy rather than openness.
I'm very happy to deal with that because Sunday is what I'm going to say on this, I think. The reason the Attorney General raised the particular issues around legal advice was essentially if the law had gone through, I think it was an amendment come to the law actually, and if that had been adopted and then the law approved, it was very unlikely it wouldn't get Privy Council approval because from memory, by the way, I think it was to do with human rights compliance. So what we had to do is, in relatively short order, was find a way to try and address the legal privilege aspect, which, please note, this is memory now because this was a few months ago, to address the legal privilege aspect versus the transparency aspect. So we spent probably, I think it was about 16 hours in the end, of me sort of talking through Sam, talking to the Attorney General, talking to the Children's Commissioner, and then we went to scrutiny to put through the solution that came through. So it wasn't.
But
so just to be clear, there is I don't think it wasn't around trying to hide. It was trying to get this balance, and I accept all the points that are made around the legal privilege side and the issue about transparency, but also the issue around human rights. So the danger would have been, it would have not been acceptable for the law to be effectively delayed. We'll go to Privy Council, effectively potentially be thrown out. That was the advice, strong advice we had at the time. And then we had to go through that whole cycle. So that's why we put it in there. The onus is very much on trying to achieve transparency. Now the question will be, if you actually read I've only read this very briefly, I think it is about nuancing, as it were, as to what approach is taken on the ability to access legal advice or not. And that's in terms of, just by way for possibly your viewers, legal advice as a whole is hammered into us as states members. We don't refer to it usually that we've taken it. It is always for you as the client, as it were, and it can't really usually be shared, so it's permission only. And it's exactly the point that if you go to your lawyer, I shouldn't have the right of access to that advice between your lawyer and you as the client. And that's the principle goes through. What we've tried to do is put a protocol in place that hopefully will address that. Certainly the Commissioner for Children at the time was reasonably happy, I would say, with the outcome. I think happy with the outcome that's come through. And certainly the comments I've had overall is that the law as a whole is of a very high quality compared to any of the other laws within the British Isles and I think further afield. So yes, it's been identified. We've got to just see, as I said, I've not really had time to digest exact comments, but it might be a nuancing of what's in place. But there were very considered decisions of why we got to where we are.
So are you going to look at it again now after hearing what
we'll look at it and digest it, and that's part of the overall work. So whether there's something that can be tweaked or not, I don't know. But the big risk was that if the amendment had been proposed to the law, which would have done what was originally desired, which was about full and open access, that the law may not have been approved, even after the state's approved by Privy Council, because of the interpretation of the impact of human rights. And that might sound a bit bizarre, but that's the position we're in.
This is the first time we've put together a piece of legislation for a role like this, and in those days where we were in the run-up to this being debated in the Assembly, where we're trying to get the best law as possible out of this, we have put in a requirement that this is reviewed every 6 months to make sure that it is working and that the Children's Commissioner is not being denied access to information that she needs. And now that the law is in place and she has her statutory powers, if she has an incident where she feels that she is being prevented from doing her job, she has an absolute right to speak about that and publish that in her annual report, which we're required to publish in the States Assembly. And that will help shine a light on these issues if they arise, and it will be, I think, very difficult or even foolish for a government to ignore that. So that safeguard of having to review this every 6 months is, I think, important.
And she will have direct access to the Attorney General, either written or verbal, depending on the urgency of the matter. And we were all very clear that the law mustn't be used by basically officers, by civil servants, to hide behind, to essentially hide bad behaviour. that would not be acceptable.
Well, and the other thing that came about, again, because of the many-hatted Attorney General, which I think should have been on the terms of reference for this care inquiry, and I think what we're doing, from my perspective, is just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. We're not looking at the elephant in the room of the Attorney General's so we won't, because I know we're stuck for time, so I don't want to go on to. There's two more aspects I want to look into. One, obviously, as you both know, was Graham Power, the former Chief of Police. Now, obviously, how he was gotten rid of has been criticised. It's been called, but the Affairs Minister was called a liar by the care inquiry itself. But it's the secretive nature of getting rid of him, and getting rid of the Children's Commissioner seems to be going down the same route. And the Francis Alden QC said, "Look, this needs to change. We've learnt from what happened," and she named Graham Power QPM about this. So are you going to be looking at that and make sure history doesn't repeat itself, that we don't start getting rid of people like we did the former Chief of Police?
Yeah, I mean, so I think she made a really important point there that we are going to have to think about and make sure that this process is watertight. As I said, it's the first time we put this law together, and some aspects of this mirror what's in the law for the Controller and Auditor General, who I think most people would regard as doing a very good job and being genuinely independent and holds us to account very strongly, and we want this Commissioner to have the same ability as well. One safeguard that is already in place is that they can't be dismissed on a recommendation of the Chief Minister alone. It would have to come from the President of the Scrutiny Liaison Committee, who, by nature of that person's job, is to hold the Chief Minister to account. So that's one safeguard that is in there. This report will ask us to think about...
I was got to butt in there, because the chairman, I've got to say in fairness, the chairman of the Chairman's Committee right now isn't going to be doing you any favours, Chief Minister. So,
and quite the independent check and balance.
For this application, that's a healthy tension, you can say. But we're going to have to think about this again. The law is still new, it's the first time we've done it, and I welcome these recommendations because they help focus our minds on it.
Right, I've been hurried up now. There's two more aspects I want to just if we can, so obviously be brief if you can. So last time we interviewed the Chief Minister, I mentioned that the injustice, massive injustice that still lays where the Chief of Police's prosecution defence case isn't on the state's website, where the Wiltshire Constabulary, their prosecution case against the former police chief is still on the state's website. The defence case, last time you and I spoke, I said, isn't on the state's website, and that's not right, that's not justice. You said you would look into it and get back to me.
I was really admit that I haven't
can I have a commitment from you today that you will look into this and decide one way or another
I fully admit that has slipped my mind. I will have a look and see what the position is.
I appreciate that, and I suppose because I spoke with Sandy Cameron, Professor Cameron, and interviewed him, and because Francis Alden QC rightfully acknowledged the work done by Liz McKeon, the late Liz McKeon. She's done a phenomenal job as a journalist, especially in the Jimmy Savile case. But she also acknowledged the social media, and she didn't mention the name, but it was the bloggers like myself. And she mentioned us in a positive light, as did Professor Cameron, that we are doing a good job of holding, and we should carry on doing a good job of holding people like yourselves to account. What's your what do you say about what I do, what Voice for Children does, where do we fit in holding you lot to account?
I fully agree with the comments from Francis Alden. I think in this area we've done well at holding us all to account, and certainly my direct experience is you've been quite responsible as well.
Yeah, I was pleased you got the acknowledgement, and I hope that encourages actually others to understand that in this new age with social media, ordinary people have a lot more power in their hands than they may have done previously to hold people to account, to do their own investigations. So whether it's on this topic or other topics, that recognition that as politicians we're not just to be held to account by the media or the mainstream media, but other people have the ability to take up that mantle as well is really important.